Yesterday's Academy Award ceremony in Hollywood didn't even see a nomination for Ken Loach's I, Daniel Blake. The BAFTA award-winning film tells the story of a man struggling in the quagmire of the British welfare system. Like hundreds of thousands, he's unable to work and unclear of how to navigate the labyrinth of forms and bureaucracy until he is punished by having his benefits cut. According to a new report by the UK Public Accounts Committee, though, things could actually be worse than Loach's portrayal. Benefit sanctioning appears to correlate with homelessness in some cases. Kwasi Kwarteng, Conservative MP and member of the Public Accounts Committee, joins me now. Kwasi, thanks so much for coming back on the show. What does the committee say? Well,
the committee's report is quite damning of the government. You will appreciate that the chairman of the committee is from the Labour opposition party. That's always that's customary.
It's a bipartisan.
Yeah, it's a bipartisan committee. There were certain aspects of it that I disagreed with, but you know, we took a decision as a committee to come out with a report, and we said that the sanctions are quite a blunt instrument. They're not really specifically. They're not incentivizing people to work perhaps as well as they should be doing.
A blunt instrument sounds like a murder weapon.
Well, it's a crude phrase, but it essentially describes a situation where it's not being applied evenly across the country. And the other aspect of it, the other phrase that came up, was the postcode lottery. So depending on where you are in this country, I think you have more likelihood of being sanctioned or not, and that's not a satisfactory.
Isn't it?
Well, it's bad.
Well, when you looked at all the data and
I mean,
fellow committee members, I mean, I was shocked. It said your report that you signed off on says serious consequences such as debt, rent arrears, and homelessness is caused by the government's promotion of benefits.
I think it's a bad thing, but when it's not applied properly. But what I would say, and what I think that journalists forget, is that the whole sanctions regime is relatively new. We've had a welfare state for 70, 80 years, and generally in that time, benefits were just given willy-nilly. And now we're saying, and I should think it was Labour actually who sort of piloted the idea, we're saying that there should be sanctions. Yeah, there should be. There should be.
Labour.
Yeah, and nobody is saying, and that's overwhelmingly popular amongst my constituents in Spelthorne, amongst other people across the country, because we realise that we've got huge debt problems. And we can't expect to supply welfare industry.
I don't want to get onto the back. Without about the debt problems.
Yeah, we do. We've been running a deficit for 16 years.
Official figures show that the rise in the number of households accepted as homeless have risen 26% since Theresa May went into government, since 2010, and this correlates.
Since 2010, yeah.
And this correlates with the benefit sanctioning really being ramped up.
Well,
it's making people homeless.
Yeah, but you're now opening up another issue. One of the problems that we've had that the government's trying to address is the supply of housing. Now, of course, the supply of housing. If there's
this is.
I know.
But the housing benefits cut. You're on the street.
No, but I'm putting forward to you a lot of the housing pressure is due to the fact that we haven't built enough houses. That is related, obviously, to benefit sanctions and to our welfare system. And we need to provide more social housing. The government accepts that, and that's why we're trying to put forward a housing bill to sort that out.
I mean, Crisis, which is quoted again in your report, says that 60% of people who had sanctions, welfare punishments, say that it hindered their ability to apply for jobs. Because, of course, they were worried so much about money, or they couldn't get to jobs, interviews, presumably, let alone the pressures on if they're made homeless.
If you're saying to me that there are problems with the current system...
Well, you're saying it to me because you signed off the report.
I would agree with that. As you say, I signed off on the report. But what we must be very clear about is that we are not going back to a situation where we're not going to have sanctions. Nobody is saying, I don't know whether you're saying this, but nobody is saying, I don't even know what Ken Loach is saying. Maybe he's saying this, but nobody is suggesting seriously that we go back to a system where there are no sanctions, where you simply get the money without any kind of pushback. That's not acceptable. That's not even fair on taxpayers. That's irresponsible for a government to do that. We cannot just give handouts without expecting some degree of responsibility, some degree of accountability in the form of sanctions, in the form of actually encouraging people to go out and find a job.
You mentioned the handouts. Someone would argue that, so in 2011, £500 billion was outstanding as a bailout, as handouts to the City of London, to banks.
That's right.
And the government was planning on tightening up these benefit punishments while $500 billion was being given to...
I don't think it was... I mean, you play around...
That's the figure from the National...
$500 billion was not given. It was not as if the government wrote a cheque for $500 billion. What that is that they're guaranteeing the balance sheets. They may guarantee the balance sheets.
Well, it was $2 trillion
because of the systemic risk. I mean, if the banking system goes down, then the whole economy has collapsed.
Yeah, but if one individual, a single mother, gets a benefit cut, the whole life is destroyed.
But with respect to the welfare bill, we had a situation after 13 years of Labour where the welfare piece of the pie in terms of spending was higher than it had ever been. We had 160 billion. We had 160 billion. We had 160 billion deficit, which was the highest peacetime deficit this country had ever had. And the welfare bill, it wasn't only very, very large, it was growing faster than every other part of government expenditure. So the coalition government came in with the Liberals, the Conservatives and the Liberals, and that was one of the first things that we said we would look at. And the biggest piece of the spending was this welfare bill. Now, I accept that we were quite tough on it. And actually, one of the things that Theresa May...
Tough means increasing homelessness.
No, tough means trying to reduce the actual spending, which any normal, rational government would do. And that's one of the reasons why the Conservatives got back in, because the public could see that we were actually having a responsible approach to this problem. But one of the things that Theresa May...
Does this cost more in the long run?
No, I don't think it does, because one of the problems one of the things that Theresa May has said, so in a way, the government is listening to what you're saying, because we've said that we're not going to reduce welfare spending for the rest of the Parliament. We feel that a lot of the expenditure savings, if you like, the reduction of spending, actually the spending hasn't been reduced, it's just been reduced, the increase.
It didn't even reduce the money anyway.
Exactly. But to argue that we should just spend more money anyway because it goes up anyway.
But it's specifically your report. I mean, it is this report that you...
Yeah, we're straying from
famously, you said that Ken Loach's film didn't reflect a broader reality. You've now signed off on a report that seems to be much worse than how Ken Loach saw things.
No.
This is actually making people homelessness. I mean, the statistics are... The crisis says homeless people are sanctioned at twice the rate of the general claimant population. That's quoted in your report.
But if you actually look at the report, it was looking at specific areas. And it was saying that, there are problems with the sanction system. Nowhere in the report does it say the sanction system per se in itself is wrong. Nowhere in the report does it say that. That's not what the...
people are having their benefits cut, and obviously these are the most vulnerable people in our society.
Yeah.
Surely your implication when you signed off on these words are that it's a bad thing to get the most vulnerable people, send them to the benefit of, and tell them we're cutting...
Yeah, in those I'm not defending that. I'm not saying it's good.
It's your report.
But what I'm saying is that the alternative, which a lot of people are suggesting, which people like Ken Loach, maybe he's a filmmaker, he's not even coming up with a policy, he's just saying it's bad. But the alternative doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So on the one hand, I say sanctions have to work.
There is an alternative.
What is the alternative?
Well, the DWP, the committee itself, and it's in there, says that half of those surveyed, according to Citizens Advice Bureau figures, could have avoided the punishments of having their welfare cut if they'd had a warning that might happen.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that my committee actually suggested, that people should have a warning. And I think the government is going to take that on board and is going to look at that. I mean, what I've said to you is that we've had a welfare system for 80 years. We had massive record spending, which was out of control, that we couldn't sustain.
The record spending,
and then the sanctions.
Forgive
me. The sanctions have been introduced in the last 6-7 years, and they're not perfect. We've got to evolve that system. We've got to make it work. But what I'm saying to you is that we can't go back to a situation where people were just given the money without any recourse, without any kind of accountability. That just doesn't work. And actually, we're not in the financial position where we can sustain that level of welfare spending.
But could we, if we transferred some of that money that has been used to bail out the City of London, to pay the big banks, to help people get back into work?
Yeah, look, the money...
Although some of these people are in work, I should say.
We could have another programme about the nature of the bailouts. Because that's you're bringing something in which isn't actually that relevant to this. Government spending does not include underwriting the debt, if you like, of the banks. Because the government, as I said, keeps saying, is not writing checks to those banks. It's saying, if you go under, this is the amount of money that we can put into the system. But it's not actually writing checks. It's guaranteeing their balance sheets. This is a different issue from...
there's a whole new program about accounting. Just finally and briefly, though, what would you say to someone who, say, today was made homeless because they were punished for being late for an appointment?
I think the first thing they should do, and I get people who write to me, is write to their MP. If there's a specific case where people feel that they've been hard done by, they should get in touch with their MP. That's what we're here for. We are representatives of our constituents. If they were my constituent and they're watching this programme and they've been in difficulties, they should write to me. And I will try and take up the case on an individual basis. And very often, I find that there's been an administrative mistake, or there has been bureaucracy that has got in the way of things. And we can actually, MPs can, in some instances, in many instances, resolve these problems, these individual problems.
So no failure by the government?
I don't think the government is, no, I don't think it's particularly failed. I think the Conservative Party generally is quite trusted on a lot of these issues. And that's one of the reasons why the government got a majority in 2015.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you.